Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah Ray from the Bloomfield Public Library. Thank you for joining us today. We have Ellen from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and we're going to learn about Never Stop Learning, Protect Your Nest Egg. I'm going to turn the mic over to you, Ellen.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. Nice. It's good to be here today. I am an enforcement staff attorney with the SEC, as I'll call it for short, U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. And I have been with the SEC for going on 24 years out of the Boston office. The Boston office has responsibility for all of New England, so that includes Connecticut. As I said, I'm in the enforcement division as an investigative attorney. So I have done that throughout my entire tenure at the SEC, basically trying to bring to justice people who have run afoul of the federal securities laws. So in that capacity, unfortunately, I see a lot of victims of fraud, of different scams. And so, I'm charged with investigating those situations and then potentially bringing an action against those people, seeking, among other things, to maybe have them barred from the securities and exchange, from the securities industry rather, have permanent injunctions against them for violating the provisions of the securities laws that we say that they violated. And I think of primary concern to investors is if investors have been harmed, we try to get their money back for them. And we have mixed success in that regard, unfortunately. A lot of times the folks who have defrauded people have already dissipated the assets, but we do have success. It's mixed, but I think the best outcome is for us never have to do this work that we do if we can help prevent investors from being defrauded. I found over the years that the thing that appealed to me most was trying to be supportive of and help investors, not only to get their money back if they lost money, but just to let them know that someone cares and wants to make things right. And since I found that the most appealing, I then sort of jumped at the opportunity to do a 6-month detail with the Boston office's Office of Market Intelligence. And we also, as part of that, have investor outreach events such as this. So I'm doing this for 6 months. This is my first, so in part of that we deal with complaints that come from the public and other sources, triage them and decide what is the appropriate thing. But one other aspect of it is this investor education component. So I'm hoping what we say today will be helpful. Sarah, all set if I go?
Absolutely.
Okay. As Sarah mentioned, the theme or title of today's presentation is Protecting Your Nest Egg, specifically investing tips and avoiding scams. I'm going to share my screen now. Can everyone see that?
Looks good, Ellen.
Okay, perfect. Okay, again, down here we have my name. This email address is for this office, the Boston Regional Office's Office of Market Intelligence. There are some more generalized email addresses and things you'll see at the end. But also this email address is available for people who would want to reach out with questions or if they have concerns or complaints. Okay, before we go into the substance of what we're going to discuss, I just have to offer a disclaimer, as it says here. We are providing this information that I'll discuss today as a service to investor. It's not a statement of official SEC policy. It's not a legal interpretation or legal advice, and it's also not investment advice. Instead, we're talking about general principles of sound investing and avoiding fraud. Before we begin, I want to let you know that our primary source in this office of tools and resources is the website investor.gov. I suggest that you bookmark it so that you can be a more informed investor and go back in time easily if you have questions, or also if you want to keep up on certain alerts that the SEC might publish. This talk today is targeted to seniors, and there's a section here that the arrow shows for resources for older investors. This would be the first page you'd come to if you went to investor.gov. And although this is targeted for older investors, I think the information that we'll discuss today would be helpful for anyone who is investing or contemplating investing. But since we went to the older investor page, this is something that shows some of the things we focus on and that you could go back to and refer for again. Has great information for experienced and inexperienced investors, including the 9 topics that we'll review today that are listed here on the left. And we'll go through the topics in that order. Okay, so the first topic is learning investor basics. I think one of the most important concepts or lessons to learn about investments is that all investments have risk. The potential for higher returns typically comes with higher risk. And conversely, if someone is satisfied with a lower return, one reason for going that path is that there is lower risk. And this risk, though it exists, can be managed. To do so, it's important to make informed asset allocation decisions and then diversifying your portfolio so that you can reduce those risks. As I mentioned already, the potential for higher return in investing typically comes with higher risk. The 2 sub areas that we'll look at next are asset allocation and diversification. The 2 concepts sound similar, but there are important distinctions, and I think you need to pay attention to both concepts in order to do wise and effective investing. So when you want to allocate your assets, you will try to figure out how to divide them, have your portfolio divided among different asset categories, and those primarily include stocks, bonds, and cash. By contrast, diversification is the exercise of spreading your money among different companies. So you might have Apple, Amazon, specific sectors. You might have something in the tech industry, something else that's just a traditional manufacturing company. And then also even classes within assets. Coming back to the theme, we have here the saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. By avoiding doing so, you reduce your overall risk. This next slide shows the relationship between investment risks and returns. So if you look here where we're dealing with at the bottom left, lower risk, and then all the way up to the top high right part of the slide, showing you where there is higher risk. And as you see, the return that you're going to get on things such as cash, say you had a money market or a bank account or CDs, you're going to get a pretty modest return, but there's going to be more stability and avoidance of risk. And then there's sort of an interim stage would be with investing in bonds, which is really the exercise of loaning money for a certain rate of interest to governments, municipal entities, corporations, and bond funds. And then finally, the stocks would consist of individual stocks as well as funds that are designed to invest in different types of stocks. Maybe there's a wide variety of stocks in a fund, or it could be specialized in a certain sector. When you're looking at the amount of risk that you might want to take on, if your goals are in the short term, say someone is getting close to retirement age, the traditional advice is that you would want to be more conservative or careful in your investments. If you have long-term goals, so you're not going to need the money for an extended period of time, then you may be able to tolerate a higher amount of risk, or maybe at least balancing things that are lower risk, mid risk, and high risk. I mean, I think when you're making those decisions, I would say what are you willing to live with? What level of risk are you comfortable with? So that's informed by the short-term goals versus long-term goals. But some people just have a higher tolerance for risk by nature. And I think you have to remember that those decisions could have significant impact. One thing to consider is, okay, in a certain investment, if you lost all of your money, what would that mean for you? Would you be okay, or would that be a catastrophic result? Just going into a little more detail about the concept of asset allocation. It's, as we said, dividing an investment portfolio among different asset categories, such as stocks, bonds, and cash. The time horizon that is in the middle of this slide shows August 2055 as the time in which the investor would want to have access to the funds that they've invested. That's a pretty far out window of time. And so that person potentially and largely would have a higher risk tolerance, which is listed over here. And then they would have a balance of how they allocate their assets, something similar to what we see here, with a lot of investment in bonds, a significant investment in stocks, and a more modest amount of cash that they have on hand. Are you folks able to see this slide? Oh, there it is. It's coming up. Okay. This is a sample allocation, which is similar on the left to what we were looking at on the last slide of 2050 as opposed to 2055. And then on the right, where someone is looking to access the money in 2025, so in a short amount of time. And you can see that there's a different makeup of the different types of allocations and types of investments. So this is why when you see target fund dates, they will be more heavily weighted towards stocks when the investor has decades until they will need their money. For this 2050 fund, the investor has a target date more than 25 years away, and the portfolio is almost all stocks. It's a different scenario, though, for someone for whom retirement is, often is in the near future. This 2025 allocation shown on the right actually has a majority of bonds and cash, which is more conservative approach, then mixed with a little bit of stock allocation because the person is only a couple years away from retirement, but may want to still maintain a small amount of invested funds that have the potential for a higher return while being overall conservative. Now we are looking at the second way in which you can reduce risk by investing in different types of things. So this diversification is different than asset allocations in the way that, as listed here, some products like mutual funds and ETFs are exchange traded funds that provide diversification. And what that means is that your money can be spread among different companies, sectors, and even asset classes. I had alluded to that briefly, just saying, different companies, you could have, an investment in, say, Tesla and then Ford. And so those are both auto manufacturing companies, but they have a different outlook, different business plan, different target customers. You can diversify among sectors. Okay, so maybe you want to have something in the automotive industry, say you wanted to have something in a biotech company, and then you want maybe something like a blue chip stock, say something like Procter and Gamble. By engaging in diversification, you can lower the risk of investing. Because if one company or industry or asset class has a downturn, your exposure to the broader market may limit your losses or even allow you to post gains. So maybe you're in a time when all of those classes are doing well, or all of them are doing poorly. That's just the reality of investing. But most times it's going to vary to an extent where if you're diversified, your risk will be reduced. Next, we'll look at diversifying with a 401k or an index fund. I didn't prepare this slide and when I first saw this this slide, I was sort of intimidated and saying, I don't know how I'm going to make sense of it myself, let alone, or even how I would possibly explain it to other people. But it serves a purpose that I think is worth noting. And so I decided not to skip this slide. So in looking at this, think about one way of diversifying is to choose products like an index fund or an ETF, which would be an index fund is something that tracks something like, say, the S&P 500. That's going to be a very, diversified fund. It could also be a fund in a certain sector, like we discussed earlier. The S&P 500, if you're not aware, is the 500 essentially largest publicly traded companies in the United States. If your entire net worth were invested in only a single company, such as something here like ADBE or LLY or UNH, you would have lost money on the specific day that is shown here. Same thing if you only invested in the tech stocks you see in the upper left, which are in this area. But if you instead had shares of an index fund or ETF that invested in a larger group of these securities, or an ETF that had all 500 stocks in the fund, you would either have broken even or possibly even posted some gains. If you'd like to, take a look at this again, the website that it came from is for December 14th, 2023. And the website is finviz.com, FINVIZ. And then after map.ashx. Okay, so we've talked about the types of things that you might invest in. But once you've already made your investment decisions, you may decide to change them over time for various reasons. But also, you can't sort of just, I think it's not wise to sit back and say, okay, I've got my investments. I'm just going to see how it plays out and not worry too much about it. That is not a wise approach, I think. It's important to review your account statements regularly. If you have an investment professional, I think you should talk with that person on a fairly regular basis. I think at a minimum on a quarterly basis. When you're looking at your statements, you'd be looking for things like, is there any fraud or activities that you didn't authorize? A different thing to look at is, do you need to make any adjustments to your investments due to market movements, or because retirement is getting closer and you may want to change the amount of risk you're willing to take? The example provided here is if stock of a single company becomes a large percentage of your portfolio and you're getting older, you may want to reduce your exposure. The next bullet point talks about what fees are you paying, and that can be a very complicated area. If you have a competent investment professional, hopefully that person can explain the fees. But I think a theme I want to emphasize again and again is don't be afraid to ask questions. And I think asking them regularly, taking notes of the answers that you get, I think is helpful, or asking for the answers to your questions to be provided to you in writing. You want to know fees can be assessed in many different ways, and you want to know what those are so you can make a comparison. It's not always going to be the same with every investment. So just being able to deconstruct that and hopefully have someone explain it to you. If not, do some research on your own, potentially online, or by asking for the underlying like prospectus or other disclosures that the company or the fund would issue in order to provide you with information, helping you to make your investment decisions. Another question as you're looking at your accounts is, do you have strong passwords and multi-factor authentication? I'm not sure if you're all familiar with that, but more and more, even if you enter your password for a certain site or app, then it will maybe send you an email with a code or a text to your phone, and that does provide additional protections. So as you're reviewing these other aspects we've talked about, the password monitoring, I think, is a key thing. I myself am not as good about that as possible. I think changing your passwords over time makes sense. So I would say do as I say, not as I necessarily do. Just digging a little deeper on this issue of monitoring your accounts. The first thing we talked about was seeing how your investments are doing, or one of the things we looked at rather. Are you on track to have enough money to make it through retirement? And that question will vary depending how far you are away from retirement. Certainly no one wants to run out of money while in retirement. There's an arrow here pointing to something called director's take. This is still on the investor.gov website that is sponsored by the SEC, and that I think has many different tools that you might find helpful. Maybe take your time and go through it. It may be a lot to absorb at any one time, but if you revisit and say, I'm going to look at these resources, try to digest what they say, maybe come back and you can search, maybe find answers to your questions. Okay, back to the issue about fees. Okay. As we'll see in the next slide, even small fees can have a major impact in your investment portfolio over time and how much money that you will actually make, as you have to back out the fees to determine what your return actually is. There are many different types of fees, and you may pay some combination of them. So these include holding a fee for holding an account, owning a certain investment, buying or selling that investment, and for any advice or help regarding the investments that you get from an investment professional. And there are different types of investment professionals who may require you to pay a different fee. For any new investment, look at all of the fees and expenses before you invest. So for current investments, review the information each year. You might even want to do it quarterly if you have the time. I think here, I'll say this, I guess I'm moving this on the next page. I want to reemphasize what I said before of never be afraid to ask a question. There's the cliche that there's no such thing as a stupid question, but I think the cliche exists for a reason. And so never be afraid to ask the questions. You can't be expected to know all of the answers. This is a complicated industry. And so there are people who are in a better position than you to understand these concepts. And I think it's important for you to feel comfortable to ask questions whenever you don't understand anything, and to ask for more documentation. The tip that's the last bullet point here is telling you that actively managed funds, things like a mutual fund, have higher fees than index or passive funds, because the index funds will just track some element of the stock market that is out there that would decide what area, again, something I'd say in the auto industry or all of the S&P 500 stocks. Also, on the issue of fees that's not listed here is that some investment advisors and other investment professionals are fee only, so they would just charge you a fee for reviewing your investments, reviewing just your financial picture in general, and you may pay a significant chunk of money, although you can find reasonable investment advice on where it would be fee only, to kind of come up with a plan, look at your current situation, look at what your goals are, and then maybe check in over time to see what changes need to be made to the plan, how the plan is playing out, what kind of risk have you undertaken, if you're comfortable with that still, what kind of returns are you getting. This was what I mentioned a moment ago, a nice illustration of the need to pay attention to what fees you are paying. And so over on the bottom right here, this will tell you what to look at. All the annual returns are going to be the same. So, okay, you're going to make the same amount of money from the answer is no. You see the first one in blue, the annual fee is 0.25% of the amount that you've invested. By contrast, the one in red is half a percentage, and then the third is a full percentage of annual fee. And the percentage is based on the amount that you have invested or under management. Just from my own experience, I would say I think I'm not going to find very many situations where you just have a 0.25% annual fee, and there would more be in this range, but it does depend. And so if you follow this from 2013 up, say in this scenario, to 2033, even though the return on the investment is the same percentage wise, you would be left on $100,000 investment with 180,000 only if the fees were higher. Then you're a little under 200,000 if you sort of have the mid-range fees, and if you're able to arrange a situation where you have a low fee like the 0.25%, you're almost at $210,000. So we have the investor.gov website that I've mentioned, but there are also a lot of other sites and resources that we would recommend that investors and potential investors would check out. So the next one is the FINRA website, something called a fund analyzer. And FINRA is we call it the self-regulating organization. So even though it's not a government entity, it's sort of like a pseudo-government entity. And so anyone who wants to work in the financial services, or most people who would want to work in the financial industries, security industries, would have to be registered with FINRA. That's not across the board, but I think you want professionals typically who are registered with FINRA. So if you go to the website that's listed here at the top of the slide, once you get there and you're in Fund Analyzer, you can search by a variety of using different criteria. So you could put in, the name of what the specific mutual fund or ETF fund was, maybe the ticker symbol, that's an abbreviation of the company or fund name, or certain keywords, say that it's a fund based, again, I'll say on the auto industry. This website, the specific part of this website, will allow you to compare the fees and expenses of various funds. This tool is free. I had never used it before, but before starting this talk, I went to it and found that it was fairly user-friendly. It contains information and analyses on over 30,000 mutual funds, ETFs, again, stands for exchange traded funds, money market funds, and it includes what fees are assessed on investments. So while there are these resources that you can go to, you can also engage in different types of research that would include these, as well as other information that is made available to you. I think it's tempting when you see the documents that are provided, often in connection with a potential investment. It just is a daunting prospect to review the investment documents. But even if you are to skim it, it is worth spending some time with the documents before you're making the decisions. And then don't mean to beat a dead horse, but don't forget to ask questions. Before you would sign any investment agreements, there will be different disclosure documents that have to be provided. I think the further you go down the spectrum of what might be a more questionable investment, you'll find that the disclosure won't be as comprehensive. But the types of disclosure documents would include a prospectus and shareholder reports, and then there are other disclosures that help explain the investment. It's important to find the most recent documents on your fund's website or your investment professional's website. A lot of these entities are required to make filings with the SEC, and the EDGAR database listed here in the second bullet point is a helpful resource you can use as well. And the address is listed here, www.sec.gov/EDGAR. So we've talked about investigating types of investments, but it's also important to conduct some research on the professionals that you may be consulting with and maybe entering into contracts with. You can do a free background check on any broker or investment advisor if you go to investor.gov. When you go there, you can see, are they registered with the SEC or state regulatory authority? A lot of times it depends on how much money they have, how many assets they have under management, which would determine whether they have to register with the SEC or with a state regulatory authority, or what types of products that they might offer. When you're checking, it's important to look, do they have any customer complaints or disciplinary history? If so, those are red flags that you want to consider before deciding whether to do business with that professional. You can get the firm's client customer relationship form at that site and read it. Form CRS will help explain important aspects of the investment firm and specific professional you might want to be contemplating doing business with. What services they can offer you and what you will pay for them. Again, you can pay fees and commissions in many different forms, depending how the relationship is structured. Another aspect of the thing to consider and when looking at how you manage your finances and investments in particular is making some sort of backup plans. If illness or diminished capacity comes into play, it's helpful to talk to a trusted family member or friend in advance, anticipating that something might happen, about your accounts and assets before anything happens. And the level of information that you share with that trusted family member will vary based on what you're comfortable with, but there are certain sort of threshold steps that are advisable to take. Before sharing that information, it's important for them as a resource, but also for you to organize your important documents, keep them up to date. And you can do that in a few different ways. You could just maintain hard copies of the important documents. You could maintain them electronically, or you could do some combination of the two. In anticipation of giving information to a trusted family member or friend, it'd be helpful to make a list of important account information, contact information in connection with those investments and financial situations, as well as policy numbers. Give a copy of that list to the trusted family member or friend, or make sure where they know where you keep that information. If you're very concerned about this issue, you could even consider providing information to two different family or friends that you feel comfortable with. You should have a high level of trust in them, but if you want to sort of dot your I's and cross your T's, maybe having one additional person added to the list of who is informed of your situation may be helpful. The slide we just looked at had talked about organizing important documents, and this slide reemphasizes this and what are the types of documents that you need to organize. This list, as you see, says bank and brokerage account statements, mortgage and credit information, insurance policies, including information about who beneficiaries are. What are you receiving or likely to receive in the way of Social Security payments? What other retirement benefits, including pension, that you might have, in the summary of what the nature is and where those stand. It's also helpful to have contact information for the financial and medical professionals that may be involved, because if you need to access this information, it's just handy to have it available. And also, if you are going to be sharing the information with somebody else, the more organized, the better, and giving them information about how to contact relevant people is helpful. This is a little more information here about the trusted contact that you might share information with. So this can be, in addition to just telling somebody, say, this is where my documents are, or keep a copy of these documents, you can add a trusted contact officially with your, whatever the firm is, where you have an investment advisor, or where you have investments not specifically managed by an investment advisor. And that trusted contact in these circumstances is a person your brokerage firm will contact if certain circumstances occur. So if the broker believes your account may be exposed to possible financial exploitation or fraud, if your broker is having trouble reaching you, or if they suspect you are sick or suffering from diminished capacity. Now that last one is a pretty complicated area, and it's beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. But so I would talk to the financial professionals and what the procedures would involve for those situations, because, as I said, it's a bit complicated. Do remember that naming someone as a trusted contact does not give that person the authority to act on your behalf. They cannot execute transactions on your behalf, and they cannot engage in any specific activity in your account. Having a little bit of trouble with my mouse today, and I apologize. Over time, the need for involving someone you trust in your financial matters, how much information you feel comfortable confiding in them, may change. It starts from where they wouldn't be very involved to where they would have a pretty significant role. Okay, so you can provide that person with an overview of your finances. As we've talked about, you can provide a duplicate statement and have that sent to the trusted person, or you could give it to the trusted person. You might get to the point where you find it helpful to have that trusted person come with you, because they may have a better memory of what is discussed. They may think to ask questions that you wouldn't think about. And either you or that person, I would suggest, take notes of the conversation. A more significant step you can take is to designate that trusted person as someone having your power of attorney to make financial decisions for you if you become incapacitated. And again, that's something that it probably makes sense to consult with either an investment professional and or an attorney. Okay, next is, so you've made your wise decisions, hopefully, of what you're going to invest, when you're going to invest it, how much, what risks you're going to take. Eventually, the money is there to provide for you. Maybe earlier, but specifically, people are interested in making sure that they're in a good financial position when they retire. Things to consider are how and when to take money out of your investment accounts. Should you consider rolling over a retirement account? Does that make sense? Well, it may make sense if you want to consolidate multiple retirement accounts for your convenience, but it may not make sense if you will pay more in fees. Now, there's the possibility you could pay more in fees, but if you consolidate your funds, there's actually a possibility that the amount of fees you pay would go down, because if they're being managed by an investment advisor, sometimes the advisor will lower the fee that he or she charges based on the amount of assets. It's worth it for them potentially to take a lower percentage of your assets if they're managing a larger amount, sort of like a volume consideration. Rollovers can be tricky, so it's very important to follow the rules for any rollovers. The best place to look is the IRS's website, specifically on rollovers of retirement plans and IRA distributions, so that you can learn more about the specific rules related to rollovers, because there are a lot of them and you do have to be careful. I don't know if folks are familiar with the concept of RMDs, required minimum distributions. The slide here indicates that you should carefully plan how much you need to take out, when to take it out, and which assets you would sell in order to give yourself liquid form of your assets. You always want to keep in mind what we've discussed previously, the concepts of diversification, rebalancing, and an additional one of tax considerations. This, as I said, this point of the slide talks about, carefully plan how much you need to take, but it's also important to know, the term required suggests that that there are rules that will say you have to take certain required minimum distributions and tap into your funds over time in certain amounts. So fortunately, there are resources to assist with that process. Looking back again at the main page of investor.gov, just under the heading of investor.gov, you'll see the blue banner, and the second one from the left is financial tools and calculators that will help you to understand, among other things, what might be the required minimum distributions that would apply to you. This next area is something that I personally know too much about, because as I indicated at the beginning, I work in the enforcement division of the SEC. And so I unfortunately, come across situations and people who have been affected by fraud, and the results can be devastating. There are certain frauds that have been on a massive scale, like Bernie Madoff. Who is a well-known example of someone who defrauded his clients. And it's not that I don't have sympathy for those people. Some of those people were wiped out. Some of them, maybe they could handle some of the loss that they realized, unfortunately. But what I've seen in my experience over the years is that, there are a lot of people, small investors, and people used to have pensions. That used to be the way of the world, is that when someone retired, they may get a pension, and still it might be difficult to live on that pension, but it was more maybe a straightforward concept. Now that people's retirement depends on to such an extent on things like how much they invest in their 401k or IRA, how they choose to invest, what decisions they make on their own outside of the context of such vehicles. So there's a lot to consider. And people who might be of more modest means, if someone loses $10,000 or $20,000 to a fraud, it can be as devastating as it might be for someone who loses $10 million in something that seems like, wow, that's a huge amount of money. If $10,000 or $20,000 is a huge amount of money for you, you're maybe potentially as vulnerable. So coming back to another cliche, if you're trying to avoid fraud, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. And that could not be a truer statement. But I think there's something in human nature where we're just drawn to something that sounds good. And so even if you have in the back of your mind, yeah, I'm not sure this sounds realistic, try to listen to that voice, because it's just very tempting to jump at something that seems very appealing and likely to make you a lot of money. Certain things can serve as warning signs for you when you're trying to avoid fraud. If you're asked to pay for an investment in unusual ways, such as with a gift card, via cryptocurrency, or sending money overseas, because once you send money overseas, it is much, much harder to get it back. In the cases that I've done over time, we very frequently have fraudsters conduct a scheme, defraud people, and immediately send that money overseas. And once it's gone there, it's not impossible, but it's very, very difficult to get it back. So I think you need to be very aware of the dangers of investing in something where they're going to send your money overseas. The decision to invest is yours. You get to, and you should control the timing. If someone's telling you need to buy something quickly, that is another red flag. And making decisions quickly when you're pressured to do so deprives you of the opportunity to take time to research with unbiased resources, because the person who's trying to get you to make these investments is usually a good salesperson. They know how to manipulate people. They know how to make their pitches. If there are unbiased resources out there, it's important to step back and take that time to conduct the resource. You can also check any investment professional on investor.gov. Now, not everyone would be listed there, because you do have fraudsters, or sometimes it's people who are legitimate, who are not registered with the SEC in any capacity, but are going to try to get you to participate in a deal. Usually that sounds very good, where they say they're going to be great returns. No, a lot of times people will tell you it is risk-free, and do not ever believe that. As we've talked about multiple times during this session, everything entails some level of risk. So if someone gives you a guarantee, be very, very suspicious of it. Trust your gut. What I was saying earlier about you may have just a little voice in the back of your head. Just try to pay attention to that, because it often happens for a reason. I talked about human nature and how, even though we may fear, have in the back of our head that something's too good to be true, the people who operate scams are pretty talented at preying on people's, you could call it greed, or just less judgmentally, people who are just, feel nervous about money and are attracted to an opportunity where they think they could make significant money. But a lot of what the scammers focus on is preying on the fears that we all have. Those include your fear of running out of money, your fear of missing out on an investment opportunity or a sure thing. Again, there's not really a sure thing out there in the world of investment. Your fear of appearing unintelligent, which brings me back to that other point I've been just trying to hammer home again and again, is don't be afraid to ask questions. And again, my suggestion when you ask questions is to take written notes, keep those notes, and also ask for answers to questions to be given to you in writing. You may fear falling behind. Sure, that's always a risk in life. If you're going to miss out on something, FOMO, as the popular term is right now, fear of missing out. there are some things that you will miss out of and not have the opportunity to, to join in on. I'd say a lot of times in the markets, the big institutions and very, very wealthy investors often get first dibs at, the different types of investments. And that's, I think, inherently unfair. That's my personal opinion. I'm not making any statement of any view of the SEC. I think that's unfair, but you have to be realistic about what, options are available to you, and that most things that are reliable, dependable, less prone to fraud or abuse, it's not an issue of falling behind, that you can take the time to make an informed decision before investing. These talented fraudsters that I've talked about, preying on these human qualities that most of us have. Different way to describe them: phantom riches, okay, dangling the prospect of wealth. You can make so much money on this. Your return is going to be excellent. And again, telling you often that there is no risk. Sometimes people will claim to be with a reputable firm or to have a special credential or expertise. Some of the resources we've already discussed are ways to verify whether someone is in such a position. And you might do a little bit of looking if there is indeed a firm they're saying is reputable, contacting that firm and seeing whether the person indeed works there. Well, if you're doing the searches online, I've had this problem myself. It was in the context of trying to call Dell with a customer service issue, so not related to investments, but where in the ordering of, say, a Google search, a lot of times there will be hits that are actually not legitimate. They're not what you were looking for. And you have to pay attention to those types of things, because you may think, for me, that I was calling Dell, but it actually wasn't. It was somebody who was trying to scam me. That same thing can happen in the financial services industry. Be leery of anyone that's saying that there's urgency, as we talked about, and that there's a limited supply. Most things that are worth it are worth waiting for. This one I thought was a little odd, the concept of reciprocity, where you may have someone offer to do you a small favor in return for what will be a big favor. The small favor, as we'll see a little bit later, could be something like they're saying, okay, we're going to give you a free dinner. And then in response, they want you to give them a lot of money. Fraudsters will often try as well to lead you to believe that other savvy investors have already invested. They may give you the names of people, but you maybe, before being attracted to that, try to do some research and see whether indeed those savvy investors, as they describe them, are in fact involved. All of those things on that last slide are red flags that should just have your antenna go up and make you think, should I second guess this and be skeptical? Should I listen to my gut? Should I do research before moving forward? One red flag that we want to discuss here is unsolicited offers. Some of them may be legitimate, but often in these scams, a salesperson or promoter will approach you, not the other way around. So it's not a matter of you're being aware of something and wanting to learn more. You're getting solicited. Here they list the forms can be cold calls and texts, email, social media, radio and newsletters, direct mail, and free dinner seminars that I mentioned a moment ago. I have found in my own life that, and this may be widely known, but I thought it bared saying anyway, is that specifically when you receive a cold call, if a lot of times there's a delay before somebody actually comes on the line, and then they may ask you a question like, okay, is your name Ellen Moynihan? If I say yes, they may record my name, even to say, okay, maybe something that could get you in trouble. They record your voice and they say, look, you said yes to this investment, or whatever else they may be trying to sell them. So I think for the most part, you should ignore these types of solicitations. But if you don't, take your time to do your own research. Don't let someone pressure you to make a quick decision. This slide talks about red flags that come along with phishing scams. There's phishing and a lot of other terms that I'm not as fluent with, but they describe different categories of solicitation scams and what they're trying to take advantage of. But certain clues that that might be the case is where someone is saying your account has been frozen. I had one yesterday that was that my account had been frozen at Bank of America. I don't have an account at Bank of America. Something saying contact us at this link to claim your prize. People don't often give away something for free. Even if they do, it's probably something of very little value. Contacting by clicking on a link is dangerous on several fronts, including the fact that they may end up getting information, personal information from you, and also that there can be different viruses that clicking the link could spread and wreak a lot of havoc. This investment has been approved by U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. If we were having an interactive discussion right now, I would say, okay, what's wrong with this? We've got spelling problem here. Security, it's not the security, it's the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. We don't have an X at the beginning of our name. A lot of these scammers don't fully have their act together. They may be good salesmen, or they may be able to take advantage of human beings and their tendencies, but they may have weaknesses here about not being able to present something that truly looks legitimate if you dig a little deeper. This beware before you share has a link to a video. I watched it before we came on, and I don't think that it's a productive use of our time, because I think that we've covered most of what's listed here. But these are the types of things that someone might ask you, personally identifiable information that could include all things listed here: social security number, driver's license number, age, sex, phone, income, race, and home address. These people have no right to this information, and there is no reason to provide it to them. It can only lead to trouble. Okay, most of us have online accounts for many different things, including management of our finances and investments. Advice here is that you pick a strong password, keep it secure and change it regularly. I don't like the strong password option, but I mean, maybe it's more prudent to do it. But I think if you're not going to go down that path of having this password generated for you, at least make it something that is not easy for someone to decipher, and that has a variety of letters and numbers and special characters. We mentioned two-step verification, authentication earlier. That is becoming more and more popular and seems to offer added protections. It's important to use different passwords for different online accounts, including brokerage, banking, retirement, and other similar financial accounts. If someone gets a hold of one of your passwords and you use it over and over again, then you're vulnerable in many ways, whereas if you vary them, you have added protection. The next slide is about exercising caution with crypto assets. I'm not giving legal advice. I'm not speaking on behalf of the SEC. This is my personal view. I, even working at the SEC, don't understand crypto assets very well. We have a specific, group within the SEC that specializes in this industry, both in whether there's going to be what will be under our jurisdiction, because things have to be a security before we have jurisdiction. But we have subject matter experts in the area of cryptocurrency. So if I get assigned to a certain investigation, maybe I'll have to get more up to speed. But it's just something where I think if you don't understand an investment, that's a very important consideration for you to say, well, maybe this is not a good investment for me. Crypto assets do have a limited track record. They really haven't been around for that long. It can be highly speculative. There are a lot of protections that aren't offered. For the most part, we don't have jurisdiction over crypto assets at this point in time. It's prone to scams and fraudsters getting into that space. And it's important to invest only what you can afford to lose because it's very volatile. And so if you decide you want to enter into that area, just know it's volatile and be prepared to lose the amounts that you invest. They typically lack investor protections like FDIC insurance that you get through a bank or SIPC insurance that you're going to get if you invest through a brokerage account. This next slide is something that I also have more experience with than I wish I did have in my role as an enforcement attorney. That people might not expect it, but there are frauds that target specific communities, and they're called affinity frauds. And the reason that to me it's so upsetting and so dangerous is that when you belong to a certain group where you have an affinity with the other members of it, you're much more likely to trust people and you're much more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt rather than really consider what you're being asked to do, what you're being asked to invest in. So again, these are called infinity frauds and they target members of identifiable groups. So it might just be something like, okay, are you of Greek ancestry? It's a group that you might belong to and say that there's a certain, bond between people of the same heritage. And therefore you might naturally just trust someone who is in that same group as you. Fraudsters are often members of those groups. And they're groups that you might not ever expect to have a fraudster be operating in. I was connected to an investigation where we charged, and also the federal authorities, the criminal authorities, the U.S. Attorney's Office charged this guy who was a member. He defrauded people who are members of his church and also got the church to invest their fund for underprivileged kids. And then he also was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he defrauded people. Like that's supposed to be one of the ultimate spaces of trust. And he defrauded them. I've even seen people who defraud their own family members, like even immediate family members. They might defraud their mother. And I'm not saying that's likely to happen to you, but I think you just have to be aware if someone's asking you to invest money, even though you feel like you have some connection to them, step back and say, what steps would I take if I didn't know this person? And does it make sense to take those steps here? Because the third point says, always ask and check, even if you know the person making the investment offer. The last point is also important because I've seen this before. The person telling you about the investment might have been scammed, him or herself. And so you think, oh, this other person did it. I know this person did it. That person may not know yet they've been scammed. But just because someone you know has invested in it, you still need to be careful before being persuaded by them telling you, yeah, this is a great investment. You should get into it too. So we've looked at a couple of different places, or at least briefly, I've shown you where on the website you can look for different types of information that'd be helpful, different resources available. One of those that is set out here is the alert section of investor.gov. It contains information about identity theft, data breaches, and your investment accounts. It has information for self-directed IRAs and the risks of fraud that people who have those may face in making their own decisions. Different types of social media and investment frauds. Sometimes there's a scam out there and you don't know about it. But if you check these resources before you fall prey to it, you can check out and see and learn from maybe other people's mistakes. As we said earlier, there are a lot of crypto investment scams and digital asset scams. I actually don't really understand what they're saying here about social isolation and the risk of investment fraud. That may be for people who live alone, and someone may reach out to them, call them, and be a resource to talk to. And those people with being socially isolated may be more vulnerable if they're lonely, etc. Maybe have some diminished capacity and don't have someone who's going to stick up for them. There's an investor professional search tool on investor.gov. We talked about that earlier. And then there are also investment related programs that are used to defraud. Investor.gov alerts will contain information about all of these and other things. You can sign up to receive those alerts, or you can just check periodically to see what updates there might be. And especially if there's something new that you're contemplating doing, check to see if there's information there, or even look online to see whether it looks like there are scams that other people have faced, in investment opportunities that might come your way. Okay, so there are many ways to contact us here at the SEC. You can submit investor complaints and questions to that address, help.sec.gov. You can also send, we cover, as I said at the beginning, the New England region. And so we have an office here, especially dedicated to, taking complaints, answering certain questions. There are sometimes questions we can't answer. Sometimes we can point you in the right direction. Sometimes things might just be non-public and we can't share, but it's certainly worth asking. And the website for here, the Boston office, is boston@sec.gov. So boston.sec.gov. I'm sorry, boston@sec.gov. Sorry about that. You can also report suspected securities fraud at www.sec.gov. And then there's /TCR. TCR stands for tips, complaints, and referrals. If people prefer to speak to someone by phone in the Boston office, we have a number dedicated to that, and that's 617-573-8800. Okay, so I have finished here the sort of the scripted or official portion of the presentation. And as Sarah said before, we can now move on to a question and answer period. If people have questions, I will do my best to answer them. If I don't know the answer, I will try to point you in the right direction, or maybe I can even follow up and get back to you.